Hello and welcome to the Expat Reality Podcast. I'm your host, Annie.
And I'm your host, Steve.
And in this podcast, we're going to explore the reality of living life as an expat in Australia and what it really means to feel like you belong.
Join us as we uncover the challenges and opportunities that expat life presents on the search for settled.
With our stories, tips and interviews, see us as your two friends to help you navigate expat life abroad. Just to let you know, this video podcast series is brought to you by the team at Auric Migration and Mobility. Now, Auric have helped us personally with my visa process to Australia, and we only know too well how difficult the entire process can be if you're doing it by yourself. They have also helped hundreds of our followers, and they're offering our listeners an initial assessment for free. Email them your visa situation, questions or concerns, and they will get back to you at no extra cost. Simply mention the Expat Reality Podcast when you email them at migration@auric.com. Auric is spelled A-U-R-E-C. So that's migration@auric.com. Hello and welcome back to the Expat Reality Podcast. I'm your host, Annie.
And I'm your co-host, Steve.
And today we are going to be talking all about all of the things that we personally miss about England.
There's a few of them. I mean, as far as not having to worry about dangerous animals and that sort of thing. Driving is a big thing as well. Family and friends and kind of what it means to have them in Australia versus in England. The culture and the bars, the light. There's a huge amount of topics to cover here.
Oh my God, we have got so many things to share with you today. So we better get started, hadn't we?
Let's do it. Let's jump on in.
Let's jump on in. So just to let you know today, we have a little special guest in the background, which is our little doggy called Tamale.
That's right. If you hear her jingling around, don't be concerned. It's not something we're unaware of. So jingles are fine.
We decided that it's actually too hard to try and record these podcasts with our little doggy, vying for our attention all the time. So we thought, you know what? If she starts to rattle around, she does. So
now I just want to clear something up. If you're watching on video, which we hope you are, you might have noticed I've got this very special T-shirt on here.
Can they see it, Steve? I don't know if they can.
No, this way I think.
Steve's wearing a very, very Australian T-shirt, which looks like something from 1980s with neon colours. What does it say, Steve?
Oh, it's actually the Toad Racers T-shirt. Basically, there is the Arcadia Beach Toad Racing, which is up on Magnetic Island in Queensland. It's a really interesting spectacle. If you've ever get a chance to go up there and have a look, highly recommended. Basically, they have a whole bunch of toads and they put them inside a circle and then they get them to race, and whichever toad gets to the end is the toad who wins. And there's a lot of gambling. There's a lot of high stakes tension that surrounds it. But
we went up to Magnetic Island during Christmas in 2020, and we heard about this famous toad racing, which is basically where they raise money for the surf club. And they've been doing it for 20 years. And so it takes place on a Wednesday night at the Arcadia Hotel. And so we went along to it and we weren't really expecting that much. But it was amazing. And it was raining that night and the guys who were hosting built it up so much because toad race, how long do you think it's really going to take? Probably a couple of seconds. But they made it into this huge spectacle. And people ended up didn't they? How much did people
there was
put
several
on it?
hundred. I think it was $900, I think, was the winner in the end. People get together, they pool, they might each pop in a couple of $100 each. And they're there's some money flowing around. People are just, kind of all different. Yeah, I think it might have even been more than that, actually.
I don't know. But
it
was quite amazing. And if you want to find out more, we have got an article on London and Sydney, which is our site, all about that cane toad racing. And I think we actually did a video about it as well, which is on YouTube as well, which is our YouTube channels, London and Sydney. So you have to watch it because it was absolutely crazy when we went to it. And it's kind of weird in Australia because they love to do races, don't they, with animals, which might not be quite right, but
that's right. And that's why I kind of it made sense as a segue because it is one of those things that it is pretty different. And I don't think that I've noted any toad races in the UK.
We've seen crab races as well, didn't we?
We did see crab races as well.
God,
in Agnes Water, they had crab races. That's right.
So funny. But Steve's right. definite segue into our opening point about what we miss about England, which is not having to worry about dangerous animals. I grew up with spiders all around my house, and I was like so terrified of spiders before I came to Australia. And it's something many people are terrified of the thought of coming to Australia for, aren't they?
Yeah, I mean, everyone's heard of like these sort of creepy crawly stories, and they've watched a lot of TV with all sorts of personalities who kind of jump in there and want to sort of, tell you how dangerous the animals are in Australia. Anyway, we'll get into that a bit later. But yeah, I think spiders, whilst there are some dangerous ones, they may not be as prolific as what you think they are.
Right. Well, I'm just going to say now, so I grew up with a lot of spiders. And we get all the big, daddy long legs in England, which are they've got small body but big legs. But they're not, I didn't find them as scary growing up, but other spiders, yes. Then when I came to Australia, I was terrified. And I actually remember having a boss in Sydney who moved over from England. And one of the first things he said to me was, what's the spider situation like over here? And he went and got
the spider situation like?
What are they called? He went and got someone into the house to fumigate the house from spiders from coming in. He was that scared of them. And I think people genuinely think that they're just going to see spiders everywhere when they move to Australia, and probably dangerous animals everywhere.
Well, I mean, there are spiders. I mean, that's what they do. Their job is to help you not have as many insects around, because, of course, if they didn't eat the insects, you'd probably be totally covered in them.
Yeah.
So they're actually doing you a favour. So you should be thanking them, really.
Let's just talk about some of the spiders, though, because you've got the huntsmans, which are the ginormous spiders with the huge hairy legs, and you probably see them a lot on social media where you're like, are you joking? Spiders as big as my head? What the hell are you going to do about that? How on earth would you even catch that and take it out?
Yeah, well, the spiders like that, though, I may have only seen a handful. Pardon the handle. A small amount of those size spiders ever. And you're pretty lucky if you do, quite frankly. So
yeah, well, I don't know, because when we first came to Australia together, I think it took probably a couple of years before I saw a huntsman in our house. And then I think when we were in Sydney, I might have seen one more, and that was it. Oh, do you remember actually the time when we were driving through Sydney? And I think it was rain. Was it raining? I can't remember. It doesn't really matter. But I remember I was driving, you in the passenger seat, and suddenly this huntsman drops onto the windscreen.
Yeah.
And it was like a scene from a horror movie. And we were both like, oh my God. And I put the windscreen wipers on to try and get rid of it.
It was awesome, because it was we're pulled up under this tree and this spider literally did his thing, Mission Impossible style, straight down onto the top of the windscreen. You'd never seen anything like it. It was just totally... And what do? You're like, oh, right, there's a spider right in front of the windscreen.
We totally would have nearly crashed. And so I was trying to get it off the windscreen, and then suddenly we're like, oh my God, it's gone. And then it was it literally was like a horror movie, wasn't it? And his legs just crawled up by your window, by the passenger window. And we're like, oh my God, it's still there.
Yeah, it was... And we'd trying to wipe the window up and down, trying to discourage him from coming in and just get off our car, please. Hoping the wind would blow. He was sticking around though. He must have found a little way in, to not get blown off the side of the car.
Do you remember when and then a few minutes later, we parked up outside our flat and we were like, you open the door first. No, you open the door first. And Steve pretends that he's fine with animals, but you were even like, I'm not opening the door first.
No, I was fine.
And you made me open it. No, you made me open it first.
Well, you always send someone else in just to test the waters, you never know.
I don't know what happened to that spider, but
strategy,
God.
isn't it?
There you go. That's our little huntsman spider story. But you do get redbacks as well in Australia.
They're a little more dangerous, those ones, though.
Slightly dangerous. But did you know, in actual fact, Australia is the third country in the world for poisonous animals. So apparently Australia has 66 poisonous animals. Do you know what the other two countries are?
We'll have a guess.
That come in front. What do you reckon?
Without looking at the answer.
What would you even think would be even...
Well, you'd instantly be thinking South America, surely, wouldn't you? You'd be kind of driven, or maybe Africa.
I was going to say somewhere in Africa, maybe.
Yeah.
But I can reveal to you, the second poisonous animal country in the world is Brazil with 79. And the most poisonous animal country in the world is Mexico.
I was going to do a drum roll. Anyway, all right. Well, Mexico. Well, there's like there's the little cucarachas, and you have the spadaras. Like that
Mexico,
sort of thing.
they've got 18. So we've got 66 over here, and they've got 18.
Oh, okay. Well, that's it. Look, there you go. See, we're not even number one.
There
so
you go.
You shouldn't really be worried, I reckon.
But what's quite funny is like when you end up living in Australia, you kind of get used to the whole thing. And I remember when we were in Midwest America in 2019 when Steve got a new job and we had to go over there for 5 weeks for your training. And it was an amazing 5 weeks that we had. And we had dinner with some of your colleagues. And one of the first things they asked us was, you got to tell us all about these poisonous animals.
Dangerous animals.
They were like, how do you live there with all these dangerous animals everywhere? And we were like, yeah, you just live here. Like, I don't know. I don't even know how you'd even answer that. But I remember seeing that famous story with, obviously Chris Hemsworth lives in Byron Bay. And what's his name? Matt Damon. He went to visit him. And I remember Matt Damon was on the Ellen show a while ago, and they were talking about the dangerous animals. And I remember him saying that, he comes over to Australia with his kids and, he's worried about the dangerous animals. And Chris Hemsworth is like, it's fine, mate. You'll be fine. Don't worry. And then they go into the water and then Matt Damon's kid gets stung by blue bottles, like jellyfish.
Like badly.
Like really badly. And even Chris Hemsworth was
quick,
like,
piss on him.
and Chris Hemsworth was even like, oh my God, like that's pretty bad. And I remember getting stung by a blue bottle in Manly, actually. And that was the day we came back from, after living in England.
Yeah.
Because I just remember seeing the blue, tentacles on my leg. And it absolutely killed me.
So why I mentioned the kind of the urination thing actually is because when you get sort of attacked by one of these blue bottles, the actual best thing to do if you don't have any vinegar on hand is actually to just, pee on the actual thing. So
is that true?
It is 100% true.
I feel like that's
100%. It is actually true. True
I think
story.
that's something from Friends that has just sort of become like a myth.
No,
maybe.
It's not. Look, I guarantee you, pop open a Google window now and have a look, and tell you no word of a lie. If you're in trouble, and it does sound like one of those things like, oh yeah, that's another. Yes, I've heard that one before.
Like a little story. But what I found so fascinating about that day when I got stung, there were so many people in the water, and I was like, oh my God, what are they all doing? Do they realise? But I suppose you just don't really think about it, which then brings me into the whole sharks thing. Obviously, everyone is like, oh my God, sharks in Australia, which obviously they do exist. And I remember swimming in Agnes Water where we used to live. And one of the guys came over to me, he swam over and he goes, oh, you better get out, Annie, because there's someone's to spot a shark. And I was like, oh my God.
But literally there are sharks everywhere. They're part of the normal.
But it's funny.
You've probably been swimming with them and never even known it.
Yeah.
It's like the spider thing. They're there, you just don't even see them.
Oh gosh. But when you do see a spider, then you see them everywhere. It's like they just suddenly just become visible to you. But yeah, so the whole shark thing is a bit of a crazy one, and people obviously still go out in the water regardless of there being sharks. And then even now to this day, I still get scared going into the water when it's a cloudy day, because something within me just assumes there's going to be loads of sharks in the water because it's cloudy and overcast. And I'm like, oh my God, should I go in? Is that okay? But the one thing I always make sure I do when I go for a swim is I always make sure I can touch the floor. And so I don't go out any further than that.
What's your theory on that one?
I can get back quicker.
Oh, you can run quicker back. Definitely outpace a shark. I can see Annie outpacing the shark. The shark's
I just assume
way too fast for me. I'm just gonna
well, maybe sharks don't
not
come
go
that
after
close.
that.
I don't know. That's just
They're hungry. They probably
it's my
would.
random theory.
Jaws did, right?
Well, that's the thing about Jaws, isn't it? Steven Spielberg literally made the whole world terrified of sharks after he made those movies.
Well, we actually went cage diving in South Africa, and they told us all about it, how since Jaws had started and all that, once that movie came out, the phenomenon of shark attacks was a thing. And so it wasn't before that. It was kind of that started all. So all these sharks have been culled, and all this, has happened since Jaws because of the fear, really.
Yeah, and even when we did do the shark cage diving, I didn't even really want to do it at the beginning. I was like, no, I'm not going to do that. But then when we were there that day, I was like, well, it's now or never really. So I'm just going to do it. And it was really fascinating learning all about sharks. And they were saying like how sharks don't even really know who people are because it's so rare for them to even see them. So they're kind of a bit confused really as to
when they see you in the cage. And there's a bunch of you in the cage, so they think it's like some sort of animal with 5 hearts that's because they sense the electrical heartbeats of the humans. So they're like, oh, that's interesting. There's like an animal over there with 5 hearts. That's pretty weird.
And do you know what's funny about that actually, Dave? Was we could see in the distance loads of people surfing on the beach where the sharks were.
Totally, yeah.
And they said, and these guys who were running it, they were actually conservationists, and they were saying, they'd grown up in the area, and they were saying like, even from when I was a kid, I would go out surfing and my mum would be like, oh, just be careful of the sharks. And they'd be like, okay. And, it's just something that has just become the norm for them. But coming from England and hearing something about sharks, you're like, are you mad?
Yeah, you'd be like, oh, there's a bunch of great whites just out a little bit. You'd be like, yeah, no, I'm not going in there.
Like, what are you thinking?
Ending up a shark biscuit? No, thank you very much.
And then it's quite interesting because one of our writers at the moment is in Darwin and she's reviewing a few different tours and stuff. And she just sent me a message saying, oh, I'm on this tour for a national park called Litchfield National Park up in Darwin. And she said, oh, I was a bit worried about whether there's going to be crocodiles in the wild swimming spot. And the tour guide was like, oh, they shouldn't be around this time of year. You should be all right. And she's like, huh? Like, what? Like,
you'd be right.
Would you really recommend getting into water?
What if you weren't right, though? What if you got in and all of a sudden, surrounded by 20
But then you
crocodiles?
see, I know on Instagram recently there was a viral video that went obviously viral, and it was about a guy hitting a crocodile with a saucepan. It was obviously in the backyard, and for Australians, like, oh, here we go, another story. But for everyone else, probably around the world, it's just like, what on earth is happening there? That's insane. Like, what does that dude doing even near a crocodile with a saucepan in the first place? Like, that's just crazy.
Well, I don't know. You wouldn't see much of that in the UK. I don't think people would be beating crocodiles off with saucepans anywhere in the UK. In fact, I can't imagine people coming out of the pub with a saucepan going, oh, well, there's crocodiles. And anyway, I digress. Moving along.
And then also, just on the topic as well, about koala bears on the other end of the spectrum. It's like, people think, oh my God, koala bears are so cute and cuddly and everything. And if you ever get to go to Australia Zoo, up where we are now in Sunshine Coast, which is obviously the zoo that famous Steve Irwin, that was his zoo. When you go there, you can actually hold a koala bear and cuddle it. And when you do it, they're actually they really smell.
They're really smelly, and they're kind of like a bit, I don't know, they're not, they've got really sharp claws.
Yeah, they do, don't they?
They're a bit they're really sticky, they've just rolled in some honey because of all the eucalyptus, right? So when you start cuddling, you get this sticky kind of eucalyptusy, smelly, urine-y kind of thing that's pressed up against you and these sharp claws, and you're like, hang on a minute, this doesn't match what I had in my head. I was thinking like Care Bears, I was thinking like fluffy teddy bears. I was thinking one of those, and it wasn't. It was this weird experience. So,
and then, but also, I remember when I first came to Australia. So I came to Australia first in 2006 on a working holiday visa. And during that time, I did fruit picking work. So that was so I could get another working holiday visa. So if you did 3 months farm work, then you would get it. And I remember being in Victoria and I was picking pears. Thankfully, it was only 5 days worth of picking pears because that's what I had left I had to do 88 days of farm work. So I had 5 days left to do. And I went to this farm, and it was so disgusting, this farm. It was like a scene from a horror movie. And I had to sleep in these packed out old caravans. And we had to sleep on this dirty yellow foam.
Oh.
That was our bed. And I remember at night, I had to get the torch out and I had to check my sleeping bag to make sure there was no snakes in there or redbacks. And I remember the kitchen in that place was so gross. I hardly ate for that 5 days because I'm telling you, it's like a scene from a horror movie. But there wasn't really any cutlery or anything. Anything there was just put in the sink and no one washed it up. And there was a redback living under the sink with its babies. And you're like,
worse?
Oh yeah. People who did eat, they had flies all flying around. It was disgusting. I don't even know how that place didn't get shut down. It was horrific.
It's you have they're purposefully trying to put you off coming here. I don't know. We'll send all these potential, kind of new new passportees, we'll send them off into the wilderness and scare them with some like really harsh, nasty foam and redbacks, and maybe they won't, won't want to hang around too long.
And we'll talk about what that sort of fruit picking farm life is like in another episode for sure, because there's so much to go into that.
There's a lot to unpack, right?
Unpack Steve's favourite word.
My favourite word. There it is.
That's so weird. You've never really said that word before. Then suddenly you're saying it.
Word of the week? What's word of the month for me at the moment?
Word of the podcast series.
Word of the podcast series, yeah.
And then also, since we've moved to Queensland, so we've been in Queensland for like nearly 3 years, I have to say, I think I'd seen like one snake before out in the like country in New South Wales. I'd seen like a couple of huntsmen. That was probably about it in terms of seeing poisonous animals in the wild. Queensland, on the other hand, everybody, whole nother story. So now we live in a house and we have like a backyard. Backyard, I say garden for everyone in England.
Mm-hmm.
And we can't even let a dog out there because of snakes.
Yeah, well, that's true. And I mean, if we let Tamale out there, it could be a chance she could be eaten by a snake or.
You see those videos when the snake comes out of
not eaten but bitten.
But the snakes come out of the grass and then it's like bam, they just like wind themselves up in the doggy, and I'm like, no, that's not happening. Anaconda
popping out and just like swallowing a hole or something. Maybe.
And I'm not being over the top with this because literally over the road from our house is like a creek, and we live in the Sunshine Coast where even the area where we live is quite rainforesty, and there's a little park nearby where we live, and I take our doggy down there. A snake just starts wandering around, and I'm like, oh my God. So they do exist. And also another thing to worry about my doggy as well, a cane toad. So in Queensland, you get loads of cane toads.
Oh, the cane toads, yeah. And the dogs like to, they spot a sort of squashed cane toad and they're like, oh, cool, it's a little treat.
Yeah, but they're really poisonous and they could kill your doggy. So I'm constantly always having to worry about that. And that's one thing I'd miss about England, is being able to like just take my dog anywhere and not have to worry about anything like that. And also with the wild animals in Queensland, I just want to say some of the random things we've seen in the wild up here, right? Camels. Let's just talk. They're not poisonous, right? But camels. Apparently, Australia.
They're actually introduced. They were introduced to like carry the goods further into the middle of Australia.
Yeah, but camels they've got the biggest population of camels outside of the Sahara Desert are in Australia, which I was like, what? And we were right out in the outback in near Emerald, which is kind of like 5 or 6 hours like west of Rockhampton. And we went out there we went literally out there to look at the mines, to look at some stones for my engagement ring, because we were going up there anyway, and we were like, oh, we'll just detour like 6 hours west and go and have a look.
Annie's like, we'll just pop in. It's like, Annie, it's 6 hours, like, it's a drive.
You get used to the distances.
Yeah, it's just down the road. Yeah, but it's like a day's drive.
And that was a really fascinating experience going out there, wasn't it?
Let me just expand on that point again. I think that's because we are going to get to like traffic and that sort of thing. But I think just quickly on that whole down the road thing, that's a very kind of important distinction as well, because it's down the road in England.
Oh my God.
It's literally down the end of the street.
And the amount of Australians that have said to me like, oh yeah, I was staying, with my relatives in Bristol, and we decided to go for lunch in London, and everyone thought we were crazy. And we were like, it's only like 2-3 hour drive.
Yeah, it's only 2 hour drive.
But I'm like, I totally get that, because you would never do that in England. Whereas over here, we would totally travel like 3 hours to go for a bushwalk and then travel that back like easily, wouldn't we?
It's fine.
And not think about it. But that's the sort of weird thing about distances. But just going back to the whole camel thing. So when we were up in Emerald and we were driving past, and there was just like camels just like hanging out by the side of the road. And I was like, whose are those camels? And it seems like they're probably no one's. And I'm like, what? That's really weird. We've also seen emus in the wild as well. I didn't even know that emu.
Oh yeah, Annie didn't know what an emu was. She hadn't seen an emu before.
What did I think it was?
I don't know. You're like, what's that? I was like, it's an emu, Annie. She goes, what? I was like, was it like an ostrich or something? Or she was truly puzzled.
That was in a national park near Agnes Water. It just literally popped out. We were driving, popped out by the road. And I was like, what on earth? Like, what is that? Why is it there? And then literally a few minutes, like a minute.
Hang on. Pop quiz. What are the two like animals on the national emblem?
I know now because I did my citizenship test a couple of weeks ago.
Oh, here we go.
Emu and kangaroos.
Whoop whoopers. Congratulations. You win a pat on the back from Steve.
No, I know. Asked me like a couple of months ago. No idea. And that's going on to kangaroos as well. So people think you're just going to see kangaroos bopping around in Sydney. That's definitely not going to happen. But where we lived in Agnes Water, we'd have like 20 kangaroos outside our house all the time. And actually, even where we live now, our neighbour's been here for like 30 years. And she said she used to get kangaroos all the time outside her house, but now they're not because they've obviously built a lot of houses in the area. So the poor kangaroos are now like on the golf course, I think, of somewhere, which is really sad. But kangaroos do exist. And if you are desperate to see kangaroos when you do come over to Australia, you can see them up in the Blue Mountains. I have seen them up there. Obviously, there are wildlife parks around as well. But the further you get out of a city, the more likelihood you're going to spot them. All right, so just talking about all of the dangerous animals that you'll see in Australia that, like, obviously I do miss that about England, that you don't have to worry about anything like that, like going for a bushwalk and not having to stomp your feet on the ground or anything like that.
And I think, just pulling you up on that point, the old stomping the feet thing, that's actually like a really good method because it scares the kind of animals who might be interested and, or might feel threatened. It kind of scares them off. So that's a really good tactic if you're walking through bushes and stuff. And it's a little bit different because I think in England you're kind of really walking through people's farms. And that's a little bit different that's what it is. Bushwalking is more about kind of, farm gate to farm gate type affair. And it's an important point. And then, in Australia, it's going to be more kind of you're in like a national park and there's more opportunity for things to have a little bit of a munch.
A munch?
A munch.
Oh, that's what we call our doggy, isn't it? We call our doggy munch. Anyways, so the next thing we're going to talk about, I think, is driving in England. This is a very sensitive topic, I'm sure, for many people.
Everyone's going to have an opinion on this one, I think.
But we're just going to share our sort of learnings from driving in England versus driving in Australia, right?
Okay, where do you want to start on this? Because I've got some ideas I'd like to. But what do you think, Annie? Tell me what your thoughts are.
Right, first thing I definitely need to cover here is the whole undertaking thing in Australia because, I miss that part about England that people tend to understand what the lanes are used for, i.e. the slow lane, middle lane, fast lane. I don't know why, but in Australia, everyone drives in the middle or the fast lane and they just sit and hover. But I mean, one thing about driving in Australia is that people don't speed. So most people put their cars in cruise. That's what it feels like to me. They put it in cruise, which means they just sit in those lanes. So it's really hard to overtake and therefore you have to end up undertaking, which is super dangerous. But in saying that, I haven't seen as many car accidents as what you would see in England. And that's probably just due to the amount of people that are driving in the UK compared to Australia. But the other thing I wanted to touch on, the whole driving thing as well. And this is especially when it comes to Sydney driving.
Okay. I just got to say here, when I get behind the wheel of a car, I'm a little bit of a different person. Now, I just want to get ahead of Annie on this one because I know what she's going to pull out here. So
there's a couple of variations to see. Airport Steve and driving Steve. They are two schizos when it comes to comes to him. And then he's a different person otherwise.
Yeah, I don't like sending lines for security in the airport. That just drives me nuts. Anyway, going back to the whole, that's a whole nother episode. So, going back to the whole car thing, I think, when people drive in the city, they become super aggressive, super like, it's all about me and it's my journey and, hey, you're just in my way. And I think that sort of mentality, no matter what you do, ends up rubbing off on you in some way, shape or form. And so when you kind of start to have these really good intentions, you're like, I'm a good driver. I'm going to do the right thing. I'm going to be like a nice person, let people in. If you're nice, all of a sudden people are just like, yeah, cool. I'm just going to get right in front of you, And you end up joining this kind of aggressive mindset. And it's kind of weird.
When we drive in Sydney, Steve's like, hey, you're like a whole nother person. And it is not nice to be around. But I have taught you a good trick about driving in Sydney. So
this is a good one. Definitely. This one, I love this, by the way. And please explain it.
How did you not even know this one? But I'm sure everyone else is going to be agreeing with me on this. But sometimes when you're driving in Sydney, it's really difficult to pull out into a junction because no one will let you in. So my little trick that I taught Steve on how you get around that is you wind down the window, you you get that person's attention, because people are very good at pretending that you're not there. And then you put your hand out and you go, thanks so much.
The
And
hand.
the hand wave always let you in. Always. It works every time.
I've seen it in action. I was amazed when I first saw it. I was like, no, Annie, they're not going to let you in.
They do.
Hand comes out, lo and behold, and like that kind of look that people give you at the corner of their eye, like I don't see that. I don't see it. I don't see it. The hand comes out. It's like you have to see it. There's no way you're not seeing someone with their hand like waving out the window like this. So it totally blows their cover. And so,
but you got to,
you're in.
You got to just nudge that little bit forward.
A little bit forward. Yeah.
Wind down the window, put your hand out, say thanks, back. You got it. You're in there. Done. Yeah. So that's my little tip for everyone when you're driving in Sydney, especially. It does.
And especially when you're wanting to get into that lane and there's a whole bunch of cars like this will not let you in.
Yeah.
There you go.
Obviously, the next thing that obviously we're going to miss about living in England, friends and family, which is a no-brainer because everyone misses that terribly. The one thing I will just say about that is, for me, I have struggled over the years to relate to a lot of people just because of my dry sense of humor, and I think I'm really funny, and some people just don't get it, which is totally fine. So I've had to learn to really like lower that sort of tone in a sense. So sometimes it can be kind of hard to find that sort of middle ground in a sense.
All right. Can I have an example of that, please?
I can't even think of what I could even tell you with that. But I just know that, sometimes I think sometimes Aussie guys find it a bit more funny than Aussie girls. But that's not everyone. That's just a small snippet.
Well, the English sense of humour is very dry, and I think sometimes maybe it cruises right past, and some people can look at you a bit weird, and like the Aussie sense of humour is probably not quite as dry as that.
Yeah, I'd say so. I'm also going to talk about the culture and buzz, because that is something I do miss a lot in England, especially. Like whenever I go back, I'm like, wow, look at how old this building is. It's like from the 1400s. Like that is crazy, because obviously we're not going to see that sort of architecture in Australia. And it's something that I feel like I never really saw the true value in it until I moved over here. So I always really miss having loads of gigs to go to on tap after living in London. Like you just have so much choice over there. And I think especially now living regionally, like when we go to Sydney, you see like Guy Sebastian's playing, you're like, oh my God, there's music on again.
Well, it might be good if you're a Guy Sebastian fan. I can't say I'm a Guy Sebastian fan. Wouldn't be my first choice. Sorry, Guy, if you're listening. But yeah.
If you didn't know who Guy Sebastian is, he's an Australian like musician who is literally on everything that you'll see. But
he must get hashtagged and just turn up, I think. That's what it is,
and he was on,
I couldn't tell you a song
he was on Pop Idol. No, he was on the first Pop Idol.
Oh,
that's where he's from.
Yeah. But he obviously greased the right wheels because he's still hanging around.
He still is. But I don't even know how we even got onto Guy Sebastian. That's kind of weird. But basically, what I'm trying to say is like, I miss that sort of having gigs and stuff to go to. Because I think especially after COVID, not having that for so long really made me sort of think back to those times when I used to live in Hampstead and London, which is next to Camden, and be like, wow, like, gosh, I used to go to so many gigs, and especially working in radio as well. Like, that would be on tap, and that's something I really miss a lot. And I miss that sort of going to art exhibitions as well, like really, really good art exhibitions, like that are everywhere.
Yeah. I was going to say Camden. I love Camden. I'm like, I love rock and roll, and everything Camden does is right up my alley. And it's just you don't have that sort of vibe. I can't think. I mean, Melbourne's probably the closest where Australia could do that sort of thing that has a similar kind of vibe. But I think obviously Camden has all that history behind it as well.
Yeah, and I think with that as well is that you kind of have to sort of think about, well, why am I living in Australia if I miss all these things? And then it's like, okay, well, obviously it's never going to do the culture and the bars and all those sort of things as well as what you would get back in Europe or back home in England. But obviously it does really well, like other stuff, like the beaches and the national parks and that. And you just cannot compare them in the slightest. And I think having that mindset of accepting that and being okay with that is sort of the way to sort of be okay with it all?
There's pros and cons. I mean, it's not the same in, there's definitely, each of the places has their advantage. And, it's just kind of, there's not one that's better than the other. It's just like, it's like saying, well, is strawberry better than chocolate? Like,
Well, no, because chocolate's always better. So.
It's, again, a debate is ensuing. I honestly think probably, in some cases, chocolate is
Maybe
better.
chocolate strawberries that you get from, what's it, Top Juice?
We combine them together. There you go. If only we could do that. That would be great. If there's a place where Australia and England could come together as one somewhere, that'd be awesome, actually. That'd be really cool. Like you have, by the beach, kind of this English, pub culture-y type fun sort of historic town, and then you have that kind of right next to a really nice tropical beach. Can we do that, please? Can we order one of those?
Oh my God, absolutely. Oh, so one thing I also really miss, which I really noticed more so than ever, is the light in England.
Yeah.
Which might sound like a bit of a weird one, but for me, the light, it's that nostalgic feeling where when I see people's videos at the moment of them being back in the UK, especially as it being summer, and they're showing you like that sort of late summer evening light. And I'm like, oh God, I really miss that. Like I miss that so much, that sort of feeling of just the excitement of summer and it being, late in the day and everyone's outside in the beer garden having a good pint and like having a good catch up. And you're like, yeah, I don't know. It's just not the same, I think.
Yeah, I know. I totally get it. I love that vibe in the summertime and being down, especially when we're in Brighton. We just had some awesome evenings, and that sort of late summer evenings, So and the sunset's really late, and everyone's up for some fun. It's a much really nice vibe. Yeah, it's cool.
And it's not that summer in Australia is like bad in the evening or anything. I suppose it just doesn't stay light as late in Australia as what it does in the UK. And there's I mean, you're only talking like an hour or two difference, but there's just something about it that I really, really miss. Which then brings me on to those sort of English countryside towns, the little villages.
Oh, okay. Let me, one thing I'm just going to say about English villages, I'm just going to recall a moment that we had, and we went to a little English village, and we went to one of the little tea houses, and we had a
tea house.
A tea house, and we had afternoon tea. And I tell you what, I am a scone aficionado. And now I can tell you the definition of a good scone is crispy, not crispy, just nice and baked and sort of crunchy on the outside.
Yeah, totally.
And then that nice sort of soft, moist inner section. And we've only just started. Don't get too excited. The next thing, the cream. It has to be clotted cream specifically, because that is one thing that is truly amazing. Clotted cream, if you've never had it.
It's not the same, is it?
It is next level cream. It's like cream of the cream.
It's the cream you always should have.
It's the cream
with
you dream of.
Afternoon tea, definitely. And I got you well into afternoon tea, didn't I? When we went back, I was like, Steve, I'm going to change the world with afternoon teas.
I've not finished yet. I haven't got to the jam. We need to get to the jam. Now, the jam's important, right?
Oh, let's talk. Which one goes first? Jam or the cream? Oh,
that is a debate now. Oh, okay, look, I'm going to jump right in there. I'm very much the cream goes first, then the jam. Now there's a huge debate raging here.
I can't remember which one I prefer.
How could you not remember?
It's been so long since I've last had one.
No, hang on. Like, this is a serious thing.
I get really confused. I won't know until I'm actually there, like doing it.
Really? You can't remember?
I can't remember which one I prefer.
That's worrying.
Which one are you? Which one do you do? Cream first
I'm
or
cream
jam?
first. You've been a jam person.
Am I a jam person?
You're a jam person. How do you not know you're a jam person?
I don't know. I can't. God, that's really...
That is a worry,
Oh my
Annie.
God, I'm so sorry, everybody. I can't even remember.
Annie cannot remember if she's a jam person.
Like
I know you're a jam person, though.
Wow.
But that's all right, because jam people and cream people can get along. It does happen. But,
I feel like everyone's going to judge me like I'm not as British as I should be.
No, you're not. And, we haven't stopped there, because there's still the tea part. We haven't got to the tea bit yet, okay? So as far as tea's concerned, I think the Earl Grey balances everything out. That's that bergamot type thing that kind of goes with it. So for me, that just completes it, makes it perfect. And you've got to have granny surroundings. Granny surroundings.
Granny
and it has
surroundings.
to be, it can't be modern. I would be not going into a modern
Do you want all the knitted
I want
crochet?
crochet, yeah. we've actually got a blog post on our website about a really cool places to have high tea in Sydney. So go and check that out, londonerinsydney.com. But anyway, what I was going to say is that once you have the granny surroundings, you have the jam in the right place and the cream and the nice scone and the little old lady who comes over and gives it to you, you're in the right spot. You've arrived at high tea heaven. It's really good.
It is good.
Or afternoon tea heaven, I should say.
And it's a standard when you go to a little village, you've got to find the local cafe to have an afternoon tea. And you've also got to find all the good antique shops because the antique shops in England are amazing. When I go back to England, I go to my brother's house and I'll be like, wow, look at this new chandelier you've got. And he's like, oh yeah, I paid 50 quid for it. And I'm like, what? Obviously it's going to be much harder to find those sort of antiques in Australia, but gosh, I wish we could just go over there and just get a whole shipping container and just fill it all up.
Totally. Yeah.
Oh, and that'd just be great. And then also going into the whole character thing is English pubs. I know, Steve, you talked about your English pubs that you missed.
Yeah. So,
and also just to say, it's something that I think all British expats miss an English pub because they're really hard to replicate anywhere else in the world because most of them have all got that character. They've been there for centuries or whatever. And there's something really nice about them that you can't find anywhere else.
Yeah, I look, the quintessential English pub, you can't really replicate that same sort of feel. You got the smell of the leather and the wood of the bar. Yeah. Got the glasses dangling up top, and you got the grumpy old barman with the kind of a bit stodgy look, and he's a bit grumpy. And you've got your IPAs on tap, the little pump things, and that I would never drink because they're not cold because that's totally un-Australian. And it's it's got the real that character, that sort of the smell of the stodgy carpet's a little bit sticky. Seen a few nights and probably a few too many drinks poured onto it.
Oh yeah,
and maybe even a bit of the old stomach contents emptied onto it as well.
Steve,
which
stop.
It's true. It happens anyway. So and that sort of thing you can't really. Oh, I've got to tell you this story. Actually, I used to work when I first went to England. Right, I worked in a bar for 3 days. I lasted exactly 3 days. So my memory sometimes is a little bit, not so good. Anyway, so if you've ever been a barman, if you're a barman out there and you're listening now, you must, first of all, I can sympathise with you because when you have a long line of people and they're just shouting orders at you, you're like, oh my gosh, how does anyone ever do this? You've literally got to have a photographic memory to remember what's happened. Anyway, so what happened in my situation was they had these things called lock-ins. And,
love a lock-in.
And anyway, so I was, because I was Aussie, so I was expected to be an amazing barman. I'd never done it before. I sort of, winked and nodded and said everything they wanted to hear, and I thought, oh, here we go, this will be interesting. Anyway, so everyone's ordering at the bar and going, can I have a Foster's top? And I had no idea what a Foster's top was.
Oh my God, yeah, because then you'd get them all, wouldn't you?
Yeah.
What's the other ones?
These random drinks.
Shandies.
I'd never heard of them.
What's the one where you put half a lager and half a cider?
Snake bites.
Snake bites,
stuff like that. I'd never heard of any of these. And people are looking at me a snake bite and Foster's top and a shandy
and you got to have a cider with ice in it as well, obs.
Oh, and then the Guinness people were very, very particular about how it was poured. And if you didn't do that right, you were I was on the edge of being fired. So, they were very serious people, the Guinness people. If you did it wrong, it just wasn't a good day for you or anyone else. So it was you had all these things to consider. Anyway, and then on top of that, as I said, they had the lock-ins, right? So here I am, and he's, they've shut the door, and all of a sudden he's partying till 3 a.m. and I'm expected to serve everybody. I'm like, you got to be kidding me. Anyway, so and I was actually staying at the pub because that was part of the deal. You had accommodation and stuff. And they served up this really manky gammon. I'd never had gammon before.
Oh, yeah, because you wouldn't know what that is, would you?
Anyway, so I had this at lunchtime. I'd eat my manky, oily gammon, and then I'd go, spend the evening trying to remember orders and just messing them up completely. And these lock-ins. And then on top of all of that, so the guy who was there before me must have had a bit of a party because there's always candle wax around the edge of his bed. And I was like, he's been up to some, how you going? So yeah, he had candle wax around his bed. I'm like, dude, what have you been up to? I mean, candle wax. Oh. Yeah, candle wax. Yeah. Anyway, I'll leave that to your imagination. Anyway, it turns out also that the owner of the pub didn't bother to change the sheets of the bed before I turned up and expected me to do it. And there's all his hair in the sheets. And I was like, you must be kidding me. So I've turned up, you give me manky gammon, oily gammon, you expect him to remember 100 orders of Foster Tops and Guinness and all this other thing I've never heard of, and then you put me to bed in like this stinky, like, you know, disgusting hair-ridden, candle wax-ridden bedroom. So I'm like, it just wasn't cool. So I was like, you know what, lunchtime came, I was like, that's it. I got my bags together. I was took over lunchtime. I was down hightailing it out the door, and that was enough for me. I sort of, I gotta go. See ya.
That was the end of your working in a bar.
Yeah, I thought I'm never doing that again. So I can totally appreciate a barman now, 110%. I really admire their memory skills because, but you know the worst things when people take the drinks off the bar, like, you know, you'll be sitting there and, well, they go and order them. So they'll say, I'll have this, this and this and this. And you pour the first couple, you stick them on the bar.
Oh, and then they take them away.
Take them away and you go, did I just pour that? I can't.
Oh.
And then I don't know whether I poured it. And I'm having to keep track.
Wouldn't you do that in Australia though?
Oh, probably, yeah. But, you know, you've got to, back in the day when I was there, I didn't have a till where you could like dink it. You dink it when it turns, press the button and it adds it to the order. Well, they didn't have that when I was there.
So you had to remember how much
So you had
it
to
cost.
remember them, and they had this old-fashioned till that had these weird buttons on it. And he said, you have to do it this way, and then it's up there. And there was a special order to do everything in, and of course it was super complex and ridiculously complicated when people are wanting their Guinness poured a certain way at the same time. So, I wasn't for me. And anyway, that was my English bar story. So I'll leave it at that. I think I've been through that one with a fine tooth comb. Anyway,
I'll just touch on that quickly from an Australian perspective. When I was in Darwin, when I was a backpacker, when I was in 2006, and I went to work in a bar, right? And
here we go.
The story. So I went to work in a bar in Darwin. It was a normal bar, but then when I started, they were like, "Oh yeah, tomorrow night when you come in, you'll have to wear a bikini because we all like get on top of the bar and we dance." And I was like, "Excuse me?" And this is like a standard bar, and I was just like, yeah, I'm not doing that. Like, there's no way I'm doing. Like, if you know me, there's no way I could do that. Like, I definitely am not that confident with my body to be okay with that. And instantly just thought, oh my god, it's like Coyote Ugly, and I'm not one of those people. So
can you imagine you doing like Coyote Ugly, like pouring shots on you and all that sort of stuff?
So instead, I was like, me and my friend, we were like, well, we might as well go work in a strip bar behind the bar and we'll just get paid more money.
Oh, so you thought, you know what, if we have to do this, let's go all out. Let's just
I was like,
full time.
If I'm going to work in a bar, I might as well go and work in a strip club bar. And in the bar, not like, I wasn't stripping, obviously.
How do we know that?
Because if you know me, as you should do, there's no way I would do that.
But how do we really, I mean, maybe you were. Maybe that's the cover story.
So then my friend and I, we went and worked at the strip club, oh my God, in Darwin, and it was so funny. And because one of our writers is up there at the moment, I was like, oh, see if it's still there, this place, because it'd be so funny to see it. Because I haven't seen it since. And this is going back to 2006. I know what you're thinking, like, you in a strip club, I know. Obviously, it's not something I would ever do now, but it was such an experience, and it was so fascinating to do that. And I remember, like, when I first started, someone came up to me and they were like, "I'll have a pure blonde," and I was like, "Excuse me?"
Yeah.
Because being blonde, I was like, oh my God, what are you saying? But I didn't know that pure blonde is an actual name of a beer in Australia. So, oh God, it made me laugh.
Whoops.
I'll just tell you a quick story about that because it was so funny. And I remember they had like, you know, like Melbourne Cups. The Melbourne Cup's like a big horse race in Australia. They have a similar one called the Darwin Cup. And I remember when it was on and they invited like all the media and everything for the Darwin Cup to the strip club for like a sit down lunch. And during the lunch, like some of the girls would get up and, you know, do a performance. And as it started, I was like bringing out the food for people. And the first girl, she comes up on stage and she goes to jump on the pole. And bear in mind, they're not naked, like they're wearing clothes. And I don't think they didn't ever get naked when they did do their shows anyway when I was there.
You leave me in suspense
They
here.
weren't. So the girl comes out and she gets to jump on the pole. And as she jumps up, the pole falls down. She's on the floor. The pole's on top of her. I started laughing because I thought it was so funny. It was like one of those scenes you see like on those sort of candid camera.
Australia's Funniest Home Videos type thing, yeah.
And or like, what was that show in England?
Ridiculousness
Have you
or
been
whatever.
framed or something?
MTV.
Yeah. And I was like, oh my God, that's so funny. And no one said anything. It was like dead silent. And it was so funny. And there was always a moment that really stuck out for me about that experience working in there. And in the end, I left because I remember at one point they wanted me to go up onto the stage during an interval. And because they had all these mirrors around the stage. And they were like,
yeah, they wanted you to be a fluffer.
They wanted me to go on the stage and start cleaning the mirrors in front of everyone.
Really what a fluffer is.
But I was just like, no, I don't leave behind the bar. So I was like, that
the equivalent
career is over. But it was a great experience as a backpacker to do something really random like that will stay with me forever, whether it's a good thing or bad thing.
Well, yeah, I mean, that would have been hilarious to see, this girl strutting out, thinking she's the Bears and get into it, the poles up, just bang, straight onto the ground.
I felt really sorry for them though, because they all worked on commission. So what they would do is they would do the dance in front of everyone, but then they wouldn't make anything from that. They'd only make money if they did private dances. So it's almost like a promo for them to take guys off into the back room. Yeah. And then most nights they'd be sat there going, oh my God, you're making more money than me. And I'm like, well, sorry.
Hey, I lucked out. I chose the bar. You wanted to live the high life, doing your pole thing. So,
but top marks to people who are strippers. I don't have anything wrong. There's nothing wrong with it at all. I just thought it was kind of funny that I did that.
What about male? What if I was a stripper? What if I did the male strip thing?
Well, then you go ahead, darling. You go and do it.
I could see that with my dancing around with my toad races shirt on. But slowly taking it off and revealing bits.
I think if I had the confidence to go up there and be a stripper, then amazing. But I definitely do not. So, and
you can have your stripping thing.
For people who are strippers, then amazing to you, because you probably would make way more money in general than I would behind a bar. So we've kind of detoured now.
We've detoured a bit.
So the next topic we're going to sort of dive a bit more into is the whole food situation, which I'm sure
big topic.
We could talk about for hours, which we won't. But my friend and I always debate about food in the UK versus Australia, and I always think the food's better in Australia, and she thinks the opposite.
Oh, really?
Yeah, but obviously in England you're going to get way more cuisines to choose from, and obviously way more restaurants as well. But I generally think the food quality is better in Australia. But there are lots of things I do miss about England. And that comes to like Tesco's, and you've got your Tesco's pizza, your chocolate croissants, the meal deals.
Oh, the meal deals. Hang on, you've struck a chord there. You struck a chord. I love a good meal deal. I really love a good meal. That's one of the things when we were living back, we lived back there 2018?
2018.
Yeah, I got well into the meal deals. I think a meal deal is a great concept because it really it kind of marries chips and drink when a sandwich together, which is the idea of a meal deal. So, but you kind of can, you can pick and choose your chips, and I think that's super important with a meal deal. Is that kind of flexibility?
You're talking about crisps, Steve, not
crisps.
Crisps.
Yeah. I don't know what that whole crispy thing is. Why do you call them chips? What's wrong with chips?
Because you have chips.
Chips is a very versatile word because it can be hot or cold or
you call them
whatever.
Hot chips, and that's just stupid because it's not. It's just chips or crisps. That's how it goes.
Oh dear! I don't know why they had to make it so complicated. Just do chips, and then you're covered for all eventualities.
No, after 11 years, we still argue about the different terminologies for different things. And also, I know we talked about this before, but Pret a Manger, I really missed that so much, being able to go there.
And he harps on about the meatball.
You harp on about it.
No, I'm not. Pret's okay. I don't understand why there's not.
Now, is it?
I don't understand why there's not one over here.
Pret.
Like, why is there not?
And you know what else I love? As soon as you fly into England and you see Marks and Spencer's at the airport and you're like, oh my God, it's like seeing a celebrity. You're like, it's there, it's right there in person. I can go in and like, wow, like blows my mind every time.
Prepackaged meal heaven.
Yeah, but it's good though. It's like good stuff, which actually brings me to, if you are a lover of like Percy pigs, which I know many people are.
Oh, Percy pigs.
I found a shop.
How about hula hoops?
You can get hula hoops in Australia, can't you?
Oh, probably, yeah.
I don't know. I always get confused because you've got the English aisle, haven't you, in Coles, and they're like
Quavers.
Quavers.
Remember Quavers? I remember quavers.
But going back to that, so I remember, so I found a shop in Redfern in Sydney called the Redfern Convenience Store. They sell Percy pigs in there. So if you are missing them from Marks and Spencers, they sell them, but they sell like a huge assortment of them, and they have like all the specialist sort of sweets from all around the world, where they've got like so many different variations from England, and they're like all sort of things that you didn't even know existed, like really rare sweets, like chocolate orange, but white chocolate orange. Maybe that is a thing
White
now.
chocolate
but yeah,
orange?
you can get that.
Oh,
And
I'm not sure about that though.
there's loads and loads, but you have to go in the shop. It's really good, and it's really famous now. The guy is like a genius at his like social media, and he's become really massive. And I just randomly found it on the internet, and I was like, "Oh, go and have a look in." And I was just like, "Wow, this shop is amazing!" So go and have a look in there. There is an article on our site as well about it, and actually, I made a video about it as well because I've just loved it so much. So you can can get Percy pigs from that.
Who would have thought a
space.
video about a convenience store? But anyway,
I know, but
it's actually that good
It's
though.
like
Isn't it? It's
party.
really
Do you
good.
remember? You probably don't remember. Do you remember party rings? Do you know what they are?
Party rings.
Oh my god,
No.
party rings. If you grew
A
up in
little
the
bit
80s,
suspect though.
grew up in 80s, 90s, you will remember party rings being a very staple part of your diet, as it was with mine.
Was that like Pez? Anything like Pez? Pez? Remember Pez?
Pez?
Pez.
Oh,
No,
Pez. Yeah. No, it's not the same.
Uh,
They are, party rings are like biscuits that have icing on the top of them, and they look like a donut. Full of
Oh.
E numbers and God knows what.
E numbers.
And also,
What E number do you fancy?
oh God,
Yeah,
you think about what we grew up with.
I know.
Oh my gosh. And then Heinz beans as well. So in Australia, you get the Australian version of Heinz beans, but you also get the English recipe, and it's not the same.
Oh yeah, I totally agree with you. They're like, I think the English recipe is vastly superior to the Australian recipe.
Well,
Really?
I have to say now, I prefer the Australian version. to the
Really?
English one.
No-
Yeah, I think
no.
I've just got used to it.
Get out.
There you go.
Wow.
So, I mean, God, we could talk about different variations of food all
Okay,
day long.
favorite chocolate. I'm going to put my hand up and say Galaxy. I think Galaxy is definitely a winner. I think probably the best chocolate. Probably the best.
Yorkie's
good, but no.
Galaxy Ripple. Yum.
Oh yeah.
Chocolate in Australia, it does not taste the same as English chocolate.
No, and that's for a very good reason. We actually learnt this in India and kind of brought the whole thing home. But basically, the temperatures are the key here. So what happens is, because it is warmer in Australia, obviously, they have to add these little things or this agents, think E numbers, maybe like that. I don't know the science in it. But what I do know is that these agents are added to prevent it from melting. And they have an effect on the flavour. So they make a difference to the, how it sort of feels in your mouth, because, it's cold in England. So they don't have to worry about it being warm. So hence the flavour is different. So that's Steve's tip of the day.
Oh, right, Steve's tip. Also, it's kind of interesting to see about food shops as well. So obviously, buying a food shop in England is way cheaper than in Australia. I remember when we lived in England in 2018, our food shops were coming to like £60 a week, which is mad when you think about it. And then now, God, I don't even want to even think about how much we pay in Australia. But another thing I noticed as well in England is like how the organic sections, the fresh food organic sections, were always way bigger in England. Like you'd see a whole aisle of like organic food, whereas in Australia, there's like a tiny section, which I always find really weird why they don't have that more in Australia. So that's definitely something I do miss about England for sure. And actually, I remember one of the last times I went to England, and I went to Waitrose with my brother, and he gets out this sort of machine, and he's like, "Have you seen this yet, Annie?" And I was like, "What is that?" And he's like, "Oh, you walk around and you scan your food shop while you're shopping, so you know how much it's going to come to." And I was like, "What?"
That's awesome. How good is that?
I was like, that is the best thing ever. I haven't seen it in Australia. I don't know if they've got it in Sydney or Melbourne yet, but
I don't think that Coles or Woolies be into that, because they're like, that's half their revenue is the whole thing that you spend too much. It doesn't seem
isn't
like
that with every shop?
it doesn't
in
seem
general?
like the sort of thing you'd want to do. I know that'll really make us more money.
Yeah.
We should like tell people how much they're paying before they pay.
Obviously, another thing I really miss about the UK is clothes shopping, which I miss it and I don't miss it, because in Australia I don't buy hardly very much at all anymore. But in the UK, they change their stock daily, and so I felt like I was being very much coerced into like, I need to go and shop more. But what I did find is like, obviously the quality of clothing is way better generally in England and much cheaper. But in Australia, I could spend like $100 on a pair of shoes, and I'll know full well that I could probably get them Primark for like £6, which is why I don't really shop very much in Australia. So if you do go back, I would just stock up on as much as you can before you come back to Australia in general. And another thing I always notice after being in the UK, and I come back to Australia after a holiday, and I put the TV on, and I'm like, oh my God, Australian TV.
Australian TV is, I don't know, it just doesn't hold its water against English TV. I find English TV is much more sort of, I don't know, geared towards people that are a bit more kind of, I don't know, how would you say, like not five? So,
they're like not talking to you like they're robots. So they're like,
they're not like pretend people. Like I just feel it's more like engaging and kind of stuff that's on, Australian TV at kind of 7:30 is on a Saturday morning for children. It does feel a bit like that.
It is, isn't it?
It does, but I just don't feel like they talk to you all the time like you're an adult. So it's a little bit kind of embarrassing, I think, but in some respects. And there's there are some good ones out there. Don't get me wrong. But I think as a whole, I think it leaves a bit to be desired. So
I think on English TV as well, people are a bit more opinionated as well, like the presenters and stuff, or sort of talk about, what they actually think rather than reading a script. But yeah, I mean, we're really lucky now in Australia because we get loads of English shows, which I've realised pretty much most of the TV I watch in Australia is English shows anyway. But another thing.
What's your favourite show? What's your favourite English show, Annie?
What, over here?
Not just of all time.
Of all time? Oh, God, I don't know.
I would have thought it was Love Island, isn't it?
No, Love Island didn't come out when I was in England, so I've never seen it. I've seen a little bit of it, but I've never really watched Love Island.
Oh.
So because it wasn't out.
I know X on the Beach. That's what you like.
Oh yeah. Oh, Geordie Shore. Remember we watched that quite a bit, didn't we, in Sydney? That's quite funny.
I'm not a fan, just in case you're wondering.
Geordie Shore. Sure.
Not any of those things.
Are you sure?
110%. No, definitely not my vibe.
What's your favourite English show?
Oh, okay. Yeah, cool. I'm a bit of a doco fan. Probably anything to do with World War II documentaries.
Oh
that's
my God.
I know it's super weird, hey, but that's my thing. I'm just kind of interested in that stuff. And obviously it's fascinating for me, like being in England and having all that sort of to kind of explore. So yeah, a little bit different to Love Island UK, I would say. Yeah.
I'll tell you what I'm into at the moment. Obviously, Graham Norton. I still have got to watch that on a Friday night. I really like George Clark's house renovation shows as well.
Yeah.
That's pretty good.
Yeah.
Or when Ben Fogle would go.
Love Ben Fogle. Where the Wild Men Are.
Yeah, that was a good one.
Super good. Yeah, that's been my favourite,
like that
actually.
one, where he basically where people leave the sort of corporate city life and they go and live out in the wild, which is kind of cool.
That's it.
Definitely sort of thing.
Lock that one is my fave.
But yeah, God, I could talk about this forever. But another thing I do miss about England is just sort of being really close to lots of other countries and having that sort of access to be able to go and visit places. Because I think after living in Australia, you realise, God, we're pretty isolated here. There's not a huge amount of places you can go to that don't require a long flight and that are outside of the country. And I remember recently we were really lucky to go to Italy, as the borders had opened up. And I remember we met this woman in Venice and she was English, but she lived in the Netherlands and she'd lived there for 20 years or something. And we're having a chat to her and everyone at that time were like, Australia's open, you can now travel. And we're like, yeah, I know. And she had said to us that she just popped over to Venice for a couple of days for the Biennale. And for me, I was so envious of that. And I was like, wow, imagine what sort of life we would lead where you could just go and do things like that. And then we talked about it, didn't we? And we were like, would we take it for granted? And would we just sort of see it like, oh, do we want to spend money going to another city that, obviously has the beautiful history and architecture and everything.
No.
But would we start to see it as which city was that again? Or, would we sort of see it in a different light?
Do you think we'd lose the appreciation of that? No, I honestly don't think so. I just think you would really have a real richness and a kind of rich understanding. But I think the problem being is that you actually, when we were there anyway, we had this exactly that thought that, we'll be so close to everything and, well, do trips all the time. It's actually still expensive. I mean, it's not cheap. Even though
Venice is really
might be
expensive.
pound Ryanair flights or whatever going crazy, like not £5.50 to go to Mallorca or something. But the whole thing is it's still expensive, and the taxi ride there is probably going to cost you more than the plane flight. So I think the thing is there to take away from that is that, while you think that you might be, it might be a great thing that, you're there to have all that access, there's actually not, you're actually not going to probably do it as much as what you think.
And I think also with that as well, like after living in Australia, it really gave me that total appreciation for being in Italy. And I'd been to Italy a few times before, like obviously before I met you, Steve, and I lived in England. And this time I saw it in a completely different way. And I was like, wow, look at these towns and these cities are absolutely beautiful. And like, this is just like the most amazing country in the world. Like how absolutely pristine, like stunning it is, and how they've preserved it so well. Would I think the same if I was living in England and I went over? I don't know. But like the whole point is that after living in Australia and not seeing anything like that, and then going over there, it's like, oh, I get it now. I understand why Australians are obsessed with Europe and why everyone loves to go and visit there, because I now see it in a completely different light to how I have done before.
And I think that's what, you do have a new appreciation, I think, when you are so far away over here that, you have a newfound appreciation being so close to the rest of the world, well, the European world anyway. So, I think that's definitely a valid point. Yeah.
And one thing that really I do kind of miss quite a bit about England in a very funny way, which I didn't quite realise until we lived back there, is how everyone apologises for everything in England.
Sorry.
Something I'm trying to get Steve to work on a bit more is about how to say sorry.
Literally everyone says sorry all the time. Like, oh, sorry, sorry.
But like when I had my job there and I, get into the kitchen to make a tea and I was sorry. And I'm like, oh my God, why is everyone saying sorry? But then also at the same time, there's different ways about how to approach people as well, like how you welcome people.
All right.
And then in England, you'd be like, in Australia, you'd be like, how are you going?
How you going?
How you going?
How you going?
And so when we came back from England to Australia, and I'd always like, and I still had that sort of mindset. I'd be like to your neighbours, I'd be like, all right, and they'd look at me like really weird, like what? Like what are you saying? Like, yeah, I'm okay. What's wrong?
I'm all right. Yeah.
And so that always makes me laugh when I think about those different sort of ways that you speak to people, how you've got to really think about it. And same goes with like vegetables. When I think of like zucchinis, and I'm like, what is that called? I can't even think. What is that called in English?
Oh, can I dangle this for a bit?
What's a zucchini? What is it?
Think about it.
I can't remember. What's it called?
Peeling the zucchini with a
what?
I
can't think.
Courgette.
Oh, courgette.
Oh my gosh.
And an eggplant as well. What's an eggplant? Oh, aubergine.
Oh,
there you go.
Thank you. We got there with that one though.
Those sort of things. I actually remember when I first came to Australia and I went to go and get pizza and they were like, oh, do you want eggplant on it? And I was like, what's eggplant? And they honestly thought I was really dumb. The people in the pizza shop, they were like, you don't know what eggplant is? I was like, no.
Well, I had the same thing when I was in the UK. And when I first went there in 2005 and I was living with some flatmates and then we were cooking up a roast and they said, oh, I'll put the courgettes in. And I went, what? What are they? And
well, yeah, go on.
And I was like, you mean like a zucchini? And they're like, what are they? And
I remember at Christmas time, which is what we're going to talk about next, actually. That's a great segue to get into it. Is Christmas and how, like, it's obviously not the same over in Australia as what it is back home. But I remember cooking Christmas lunch for your family because I was like, I'm not doing a seafood thing. No, I don't care how hot it is.
Cold prawns.
We're having
that's tradition.
I was like, we're having a proper Christmas lunch. I'm going to cook it.
Boiling hot. Annie decides she wants traditional English Christmas dinner.
I'd never cooked it before, but I pulled it off and it was amazing. But
really good.
It was really good, wasn't it? And I remember your family going, what are these, Annie? And I'm like, Yorkshire puddings. And they were like, what is that?
I looked at it like, what have you done to this pie?
And I was like, come on, you guys have had a Yorkshire pudding.
But literally, if you hadn't seen them before, they're like, all right, so you've got the pastry and like mess with it. and just took the meat out of the pie and you cook that up. Is that the idea? And that's
So
honestly
funny.
kind of what it felt like to me when I first. I was like, what's the purpose? I was like, why is it a cup? Like, it's meant to hold the gravy, right? But no one would pour gravy into it. Isn't that weird? They'd pour it on the side. I was like, surely it's
Pour
like
gravy into it. People do that.
Would you use it specifically as a gravy holder?
No, but you could put gravy into it. I think lots of
You
people
could,
do.
but it's not designed for that. That's what I was trying to get at.
Could be. I don't know.
It's kind of found its way into being a gravy holder. Do you know what I mean? Like its purpose wasn't that. Maybe I don't know. What was its original purpose? I would love to know.
I don't know.
Oh, I'm going to be googling that later. I'll get back on the next episode.
Okay, Steve. So I really miss all the build up to Christmas in England. You've got the music on everywhere, the lights, the pubs are all busy. And yet in Australia, the only time that I'm reminded that it's coming up to Christmas, do you know what it is?
Is it all Christmas ads on TV?
No, there's no Christmas ads on TV. The only time that I get reminded that it's Christmas in Australia is when I go to Coles or Woolies and they play the music in there. That's literally
it's like Jingle Bell Rocks going there. Yeah.
That's the only time I ever hear it.
Yeah,
So,
true.
Yeah. So for me, I really miss Christmas in Australia. And but I do love New Year's in Australia, and January is amazing as well. And it's quite funny because everyone takes like so much time off between Christmas and New Year that most people don't really go back to work till like mid-January or even late January in Australia. Whereas in England, like, you would just have those public holidays off and then you'd be back to work like on January 2nd. So that's a whole thing that's like, yeah.
Yeah, look, it's much more festive, I think, in that sense. If you want to get into the whole, Jesus in the manger thing, like that's right, that's there. That's there for the soaking, Whereas I think here it's very like kind of everyone's maintained a very neutral line on it. So, and look, whatever your flavour, whatever you like, whatever you fancy, if you want some Jingle Bell Rock, it's probably going to work more in your favour to be in England, I think, for that sort of thing. Christmas. Definitely for all the away in the manger type stuff, yeah.
And
definitely.
You find even with that sort of between Christmas and New Year, like in the UK, Boxing Day sales come, which obviously you get them in Australia as well. But I don't know, there's something different about it.
People are very vicious at a Boxing Day sale. Yeah. They will use elbows. General. Do they do that in England as well?
Yeah, I would say so.
Pretty nuts, right?
I worked at Next. Do you know what Next is?
Yeah.
I worked at Next clothing shop for a Christmas sale. And at 6 a.m, the doors would open and people, it was men, were literally running in and run upstairs to the men's department and grab what they could for the sale. And but I love that sort of Christmas shopping.
Take no prisoners.
Yeah, but then you get like your Christmas outfit, like for New Year's and everything. And you go to Christmas, like your New Year's party. And there's something about that. Whereas in Australia, like if you're in Sydney, like on New Year's, it's pretty dead apart from the tourists. Like everyone's like left and like gone on holidays. So most people go camping up and down the coast for Christmas holidays. So it's kind of weird. Like there's not that sense of sort of, I don't know.
Yeah, no, it is. It's not the same in that sense. It's like everyone goes on, has their sort of, little camper van or something. They go find a caravan park. It's with the kids, they're on the beach. It's very kind of family time out of the city. That's what kind of happens. So it's a different vibe. And look, if you're into the beach and having, nice sort of sunny times, it is very good.
Very good.
Barbecues, thinking barbecues, thinking snags on the barbie.
Snags.
We don't put any shrimps. There's no shrimps.
It's not even called shrimp over here, is it?
Don't do shrimps.
Why do they do?
It's snags.
Who came up with that saying, shrimps on the barbie?
That was Paul. That was thanks to Mr. Hogan, Mr. Paul Hogan.
Are you talking about Mr. Crocodile Dundee?
Crocodile Dundee. He was the man who set it in everyone's minds that it was a shrimp. And I tell you what, people will look at you very oddly if you turn up and say, "Oh, can we throw a shrimp on the barbie?"
Is that he must have said that for Americans then, I'm guessing.
Yeah, totally. Yeah.
When did he say it? Did he say it in Crocodile Dundee?
No, this is like years ago for like some, probably in the 70s or something. So it's like a marketing campaign.
Weird.
Yeah, maybe the early 80s, I don't know. Around that sort of time, but you're kind of before my heyday, so.
Are you sure?
Maybe. I don't know, depending. I've got a few grey hairs these days, so,
Steve, stop.
Anyway.
So guys, there's a few things there that we've just sort of unpacked.
We've unpacked a few things, definitely.
What we miss about England. And next up, we're probably going to make a part 2 about this, about things that we love about Australia, because there are plenty of things that we do like about Australia as well.
Oh, so many.
It's not all doom and gloom that we just miss England and that's it. So Like we said, everywhere comes with its pros and cons, and there could be plenty of things that we could tell you that we certainly do not miss about England, but we will leave it with the positive notes today, I think.
Too right. But yeah, stay tuned for the next episode, and yeah, be good to you. Be good to all of you.
Thanks for listening, everyone. We'll be back next week. See you soon.
Take care. Bye.
Bye.